Welcome to LOA Today. Walt Thiessen and life coach Cindy Chavez here. Today is Wednesday, December the 19th, 2018. It's 4 p.m. New York time, 1 p.m. in Los Angeles, 9 p.m. in London, and in Sydney, Australia, good morning, it's 8 a.m. Thank you for wherever you are in the world tuning in to join us if you're listening to the live stream today, or if you're listening to the recorded version as well, which is what most people do. Thank you as well. We appreciate every single one of you. And we are once again investigating Neville Goddard's The Power of Awareness, and we hit gold, Cindy. We hit gold with this chapter 23 because it's just loaded with these wonderful stories that are just picking us right up and giving us a good feeling day.
Right? I love it.
It's fabulous. Ugh. And we're going to continue with that, of course. This is also a Q&A, too, for people who are in the Law of Attraction Changed My Life group. So if you're in the group and you want to participate by typing in questions and so forth, we'd love to take on your questions. Or if you have comments, we'll try to share as many comments as we can as well. And Cindy, this morning, there was actually a question from someone named, oh boy, I hope I don't mispronounce the name, Smohith, I believe it was. Smohith said, I would love to know your comments regarding eustress, which in parentheses he describes as positive stress. I had not heard that term before. Eustress, E-U-S-T-R-E-S-S. I don't know if you've heard of that one.
I have heard that term before.
You do know it.
I haven't heard it in a long time. Like I had forgotten it, but because the first time I ever saw it, I had the same like, wait, what?
What?
That's a really good question, and what we're referring to is the idea or the fact, really, that any type of change in our life generally adds stress. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times if someone says, oh, I'm really stressed out, we immediately think of things that we would term negative or uncomfortable. You know, it's like, I'm stressed out because I lost my job, or I'm going through a divorce, or I've been sick, or, you know, all these things that we can put in the category of things we don't want to experience. But stress is also a factor in a lot of good things, like weddings and vacations and
yes,
moving to a new place, and, you know, a lot of things that we put in the category of, oh yeah, that'd be great. We still experience stress because it's a big change. It's a shift. It's something that takes us out of our normal comfort zone, I guess. So what I think are two things for us to remember is, the first one is that shallow breathing creates stress. So we need to remember to breathe deeply as much as we can. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think meditation is such a good practice, because we slow down, we focus on deeper breaths. And then the other thing is just, you know, self-care, taking care of ourselves for whatever reason. When you're planning something, when you're moving, when you're maybe planning a wedding or a vacation, when you know, we're talking about Neville's book, The Power of Awareness, right?
Right.
So when you become aware that you're feeling a little bit stressed, that's when you drink some water, take some deep breaths, make sure that you're eating something healthy. Sometimes we get busy with something creative and it's exciting and it's fun, and we realize we haven't eaten like we should eat. We skip a meal. So make sure that you're doing all the foundational things, like getting enough sleep, enough water, enough food, healthy food, and deep breaths. So it sounds easy, but easier said than done.
Yeah, I hear you. And I just realized I messed up because I hadn't actually completed the process to the Facebook group. So we're just connecting to them right now. But fortunately, I've got the video.
I'll answer the question again if you'd like, or you'd let me know.
Well, I think that you hit on the highlight of it, and that is that it is possible for stress to be a good thing. I mean, to me, the obvious stuff is what we might say is the natural use of stress, fight or flight. You know, somebody who's, or actually an animal, or anybody who's just dealing with a life and death situation. That's where you need the stress, because it gives you that jolt of energy and a jolt of endorphins and so forth, and the adrenaline to just, you know, get into gear and take it to the next level quickly. That's how a mother can pick a 2,000-pound car off her kid who's being crushed by it, because of that surge. You know, so it does play a positive role in that sense. Doesn't mean that it's positive in most cases. I think we can probably safely say in most cases it's not all that good for us. But there are situations where stress can be positive, and it's important to remember that, I'd say.
Well, most of us are producing that much adrenaline for reasons where we don't need to pick up a car or driver, right? So,
fortunately.
Self-care there. And awareness. I was thinking about the title of the book as we were coming on to the podcast today, The Power of Awareness.
Right? Yeah.
Just fine-tuning our awareness so that we are aware when our stress level starts to go up a little bit so that we can bring it back down or level it out or take care of ourselves, whatever it is that we need. Take a deep breath, get some water, whatever. The more in tune we become to ourselves, the more aware we are, then we can keep ourselves from getting too far down that road of being overstressed.
It's a good point because we can easily get overstressed and in the process create all kinds of problems for ourselves. So the awareness is how we basically avoid turning it into a negative vortex, that downward spiral.
Yes.
Just by being aware, just by paying attention to what's going on in our lives, we can avoid that. And that's powerful because probably the most important thing to learn early on, especially when you're trying to learn the law of attraction, is to catch stuff early. To catch stuff before it gets out of control, before the craziness starts to kick in, rather. Because once that craziness starts to kick in, oh boy, then it gets really tough to turn it around. So, yeah.
And I know that I've experienced before just, all of a sudden realizing that maybe that I've had a headache, like all day.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the afternoon, I'm like, I've had a headache all morning and I'm just now even paying attention. So just becoming aware of what's going on. It's very healthy to do that.
So, well, good. I'm glad we got the question answered, even though it was asked in this morning's podcast, but at least we got it answered. So hopefully they'll see the answer and getting some benefit out of it. And by the way, feel free, if you're listening live in the group, which I think is finally working. Yes, it looks like it's working now. If you're listening live in the group, be sure to punch any questions you have into the dialogue, into the comments section, because we'll be glad to talk about them while we're also talking about Neville, because that's the main purpose of today's today's podcast is to carry on.
I was like, wait, we're having a contest?
It was news to me too.
Excellent. I love contests.
Well, it was a storytelling contest, you see, because that's what we were doing this morning, telling Neville stories, and we want to continue that theme this afternoon. So we're going to turn the platform over to you so you can tell the first story of the afternoon podcast.
I will, and I'm still smiling about the story this morning about the little boy that went with his grandmother to consult with Neville and sat there quietly playing with his toy and soaking it all in, and says as they're leaving, I know what I want, now I know how to get it. Neville says, what do you want? A puppy. Grandma says, no. We've talked about this already. You can't have a puppy. And then she tells him, Mr. Neville's message was not for you.
That's right. And Lynn was asking, what book is this? And Lynn, the compendium that I'm working from anyway is The Power of Imagination, which is a collection of stories that, and there's her copy that Cindy turned me on to. But the particular book in the topic, in the compendium that we're working on and have been working on for some time is The Power of Awareness. I don't know if you can see that, but there's the title page of the book, and we're on chapter 23 of that book. Which is a pretty long book by Neville standards. I mean, his chapters are only 2 or 3 pages long, but still, that's a fairly long. And this one's a really long chapter. This has got 7, 8, 9, 10 pages in it.
Right. But it's been great because it's all been stories. And
yes.
That story this morning really cracked me up because I wonder how many of us have ever been in a situation where we were all excited about law of attraction.
Right.
Until somebody that we lived with or somebody that we knew decided to use it too, and we got worried they were going to use it to attract something we didn't want, like a puppy, right? We might be able to collect some stories of our own.
That was such a cool story, though, because not only did he attract the puppy, but he attracted the puppy in a way that his parents would accept. That was really cool.
That was amazing. Amazing. So the next story is a business executive So let's see what happens with him. Neville says, this story illustrates the successful use of the law by a New York business executive. And when Neville talks about the law, of course, we're talking about what he calls the law of assumption.
Right.
And that is that if we successfully can assume the feeling of our wish already fulfilled, it will harden into fact.
Exactly.
So he says, in the fall of 1950, an executive of one of New York's prominent banks discussed with me a serious problem with which he was confronted. He told me that the outlook for his personal progress and advancement was very dim. Having reached middle age and feeling that a marked improvement in position and income was justified, he had talked it out with his superiors. And they frankly told him that any major improvement was impossible and intimated that if he was dissatisfied, he could seek another job. This, of course, only increased his uneasiness.
How many people have experienced that conversation, I have to ask?
To have someone say, look, if you're not happy here, go find another position somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not a good feeling.
It's not a good feeling, but it happens all the time. It's very common.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, it takes a lot of courage usually for someone to go in and say, I think I deserve a raise and advancement.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So Neville says, in our talk, he explained that he had no great desire for really big money, but he had to have a substantial income in order to maintain his home comfortably and to provide for the education of his children in good preparatory schools and colleges. This he found impossible on his present income. The refusal of the bank to assure him of any advancement in the near future resulted in a feeling of discontent and an intense desire to secure a better position with considerably more money.
By the way, I should point something out. I actually worked for a bank when I was quite a bit younger, and I can attest to what he's saying. If you're trying to come up with an income that you can actually live on, don't work at a bank. It doesn't work.
So Neville says he confided in me that the kind of job he would like better than anything in the world was one in which he managed the investment funds of a large institution, such as a foundation or a great university.
Ah, that's a good idea.
In explaining the law of assumption, I stated that his present situation was only a manifestation of his concept of himself, and declared that if he wanted to change the circumstances in which he found himself, he could do so by changing his concept of himself. In order to bring about this change of consciousness, and thereby a change in his situation, I asked him to follow this procedure every night just before he fell asleep. In his imagination.
Before you get into that, I want to mention something. His concept of himself. Is that a phrase we've heard from Neville before? Because that sounds fairly new to me.
Oh, really? No,
Yeah.
I feel like it's been over and over and over.
I mean, what he's described over and over again has been his method, his way of doing things. But I don't think has he called it his concept of himself? I mean,
yes.
He has. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes, and there have been at least 2 chapters in this book early on where he does talk about identity, and he uses that term a lot. So
okay.
Your concept of yourself, or when we talk about this, often we use phrases like your story.
Yes, okay.
Your I am story.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Neville's talking about. But yes, he does use that.
Okay.
That term quite a bit. Let's see. Okay. So I asked him to follow this procedure every night just before he fell asleep. And that's another thing we've been reading a lot of, right?
Right.
It's that he wants us to do this work, not only when we're falling asleep, but this is like where he usually starts. And I think it's smart because most of us do go to bed every night and go to sleep. So it's easy to form this habit if we get into the swing of doing it every night as we fall asleep.
Mm-hmm, okay.
He said, in imagination, he was to feel he was retiring at the end of one of the most important and successful days of his life. And I think when he says retiring here, he means going to bed.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
and not like retiring from a position.
Right.
He was to imagine that he had actually closed a deal that very day to join the kind of organization he yearned to be with, and in exactly the capacity he wanted. I suggested to him that if he succeeded in completely filling his mind with this feeling, he would experience a definite sense of relief. In this mood, his uneasiness and discontent would be a thing of the past. He would feel the contentment that comes with the fulfillment of desire. I wound up by assuring him that if he did this faithfully, he would inevitably get the kind of position he wanted. This was the first week of December. Night after night, without exception, he followed this procedure. Early in February, a director of one of the wealthiest foundations in the world asked this executive if he would be interested in joining the foundation in an executive capacity handling investments.
Wow.
After some brief discussion, he accepted. Today, at a substantially higher income and with the assurance of steady progress, this man is in a position far exceeding all that he had hoped for.
Wow. That's what I call results, because, I mean, there's nothing in that story about him going to look for a job. Right?
No, there isn't. No. And that he started doing this the first week of December, and this was in early February.
Yeah, so 2 months.
So we're talking 10 weeks. Let's just call it 10 weeks,
sure.
Right? And that's pretty awesome.
That's fabulous.
Pretty powerful.
It's encouraging, too.
And I love I always like to kind of examine the story that they've created. And I like this one as well. It's where he imagines that he's going to bed and that day he had closed this deal.
Right, yeah.
Accepted the position. And what would he feel like? And notice that he talked about relief.
I heard that, yes. That was interesting.
That's one of those emotions or feelings that I think is worth memorizing. We've talked about this before. I had a situation where I had gone from Louisiana to California, and I was in California, and I opened Facebook, and I saw a post where someone I knew said, "Does anyone know the name of the cyclist that got hit on River Road this morning?" Well, at the time, my son was a pro cyclist, and that River Road was where he trained. So I was freaking out and calling all the phones, and no one was answering.
Oh, no.
And when I finally did get a hold of somebody, I found out he had already trained and gotten home and was in the shower and was fine. Then I was freaking out about the poor man that it was a hit and run. And then I checked on him and found out that someone had found him, taken him to the hospital, and he was going to be okay. So I always remember that of feeling really worried and scared, and then suddenly that sense of relief.
Oh, right.
You know, it's like, whew, you can just feel it. And so knowing what that feels like, and I'm sure that we all have a story that we can remember where we suddenly felt a sense of relief, being really worried about something, and then feeling a sense of relief. That sense of relief is important.
Oh, yes.
And sometimes that's what we can shoot for when we create these sort of stories. It's a good indicator if whether we've gotten the feeling, right? Because we will experience a sense of relief.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm glad they mentioned it.
I experienced that sense of relief very recently because I've mentioned that my wife's been dealing with a medical issue. And at one point we got a wrong diagnosis, a misdiagnosis. It was a really, really scary one. And a couple days later, we found out that, nope, it wasn't right. There was actually something much more treatable. And the relief, I mean, I just felt it just flowing out of me. And my wife was funny. One of the symptoms that she's been dealing with is she has trouble focusing. So she was telling me that this is what the actual diagnosis was. And she was trying to focus in on, okay, what do I have to do to deal with this? And I said, Louise, stop. Don't you realize it means that the old diagnosis is wrong? We can take a sigh of relief here.
Right? Woo!
Yeah.
Yes. Big sigh of relief.
Really big. Really big.
I remember one time I had a client that was trying to make a decision and made the decision and then sent me a message and said, as soon as I made the decision, I decided this. And she said, as soon as I made the decision, I felt a huge sense of relief.
Yeah.
And for me, as the coach, I was like, I think she made the right decision.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely.
Because she felt it immediately. So it's a good thing to be aware of.
Very good.
All right, you ready for the next one?
Oh, yeah.
Any comments or questions?
Just a lot of usual chit-chat, no real questions or comments, so I'd say let's go ahead.
Okay.
Well, Lynn was actually grateful that I told her what the name of the book was and the name of the compendium as well. So So that's good.
It's a great compendium.
Yeah.
All right. So Neville says the man and wife in this story have attended my lectures for a number of years. It's an interesting illustration of the conscious use of this law by two people concentrating on the same objective at one time. We talked about that this morning, so this is exciting.
Mm-hmm.
That you can do this as a couple.
Yes.
Or maybe a business partner, or you and a child or a friend can do this together.
Absolutely.
This man and wife were an exceptionally devoted couple. Their life was completely happy and entirely free from any problems or frustrations. Well, that's nice, isn't it?
I was just going to say, what a life.
For some time, they had planned to move into a larger apartment. The more they thought about it, the more they realized that what they had their hearts set on was a beautiful penthouse.
Oh.
In discussing it together, the husband explained that he wanted one with a huge window looking out on a magnificent view. The wife said she'd like to have one side of the walls mirrored from top to bottom. They both wanted to have a wood-burning fireplace. It was a must that the apartment be in New York City.
Wow. That's all I'm going to say.
A penthouse with a wood-burning fireplace in New York City.
Yeah.
Seems like a tall order.
Well, they have tall buildings there, so you can have at least that.
For months they had searched for just an apartment in vain. In fact, the situation in the city was such that securing any kind of apartment was almost an impossibility. They were so scarce that not only were there waiting lists for them, but all sorts of special deals, including premiums, the buying of furniture, etc., were involved. New apartments were being leased long before they were completed, many being rented from the blueprints of the building.
Wow.
Early in the spring, after months of fruitless seeking, they finally located one which they seriously considered. It was a penthouse apartment in a building just being completed on Upper Fifth Avenue facing Central Park. It had one serious drawback. Being a new building, it was not subject to rent control, and the couple felt the yearly rent was exorbitant. In fact, it was several $1,000s a year, more than they had considered paying. So interjecting, keep in mind that this book was written in the 1950s.
Right.
So if you use an inflation calculator, several $1,000s from 1950 to now.
You're at several tens of thousands of dollars at that point.
Exactly. During the spring months of March and April, they continued looking at various penthouses throughout the city, but they always came back to this one. Finally, they decided to increase the amount they would pay substantially and made a proposition which the agent for the building agreed to forward to the owners for consideration. It was at this point, without discussing it with each other, each determined to apply the law of assumption. It was not until later that each learned what the other had done. Night after night, they both fell asleep in imagination in the apartment they were considering. The husband, lying with his eyes closed, would imagine that his bedroom windows were overlooking the park. He would imagine going to the window first thing in the morning and enjoying the view. He felt himself sitting on the terrace overlooking the park, having cocktails with his wife and friends, all thoroughly enjoying it. He filled his mind with actually feeling himself in the penthouse and on the terrace. During all this time, unknown to him, his wife was doing the same thing. Several weeks went by without any decision on the part of the owners, but they continued to imagine as they fell asleep each night that they were actually sleeping in the penthouse. One day, to their complete surprise, one of the employees in the apartment building in which they lived told them that the penthouse there was vacant.
Ah.
They were astonished because theirs was one of the most desirable buildings in the city with a perfect location right on Central Park.
Nice.
They knew there was a long waiting list of people trying to get an apartment in their building. The fact that a penthouse had unexpectedly become available was kept quiet by the management because they were not in a position to consider any applicants for it. Upon learning that it was vacant, this couple immediately made a request that it be rented to them, only to be told this is impossible. The fact was that not only were there several people on a waiting list for a penthouse in the building, but it was actually promised to one family. Despite this, the couple had a series of meetings with the management, at the conclusion of which the apartment was theirs. The building being subject to rent control, their rental was just about what they had planned to pay when they first started looking for a penthouse. The location, the apartment itself, and the large terrace surrounding it on south, west, and north was beyond all their expectations. And in the living room, on one side, is a giant window 15 feet by 8 feet with a magnificent view of Central Park. One wall is mirrored from floor to ceiling, and there is a wood-burning fireplace.
Oh, my God. Wow. Wow.
I really like this story.
I mean, the only bad part is that it's the end of the chapter, but what a way to end the chapter. That's like...
Well, what I love is that they had decided at some point, and I can't remember if it's before they started doing the meditation before sleep or after, but at some point they decided they were willing to spend more.
Right.
And, it reminds me of, I don't want to say it's doubt, but, it's like, okay, it's not happening. I guess we're going to have to pay more. But they ended up not.
Yeah. That's interesting.
It says they ended up renting it for what they had originally thought they would want to pay.
Right. Yeah, that's very cool.
I just think about how sometimes we're like, okay, it's not happening fast enough. Maybe we need to do this. Maybe we need to spend even more. Maybe we need to whatever. And yet it all came to pass without them having to do that. I think that's interesting.
It's very interesting. I also think it's interesting that at the point in the story where they had come to that decision about paying considerably more, it says, it was at this point, without discussing it with each other, each determined to apply the law of assumption. And the question that went through my mind was, what took them so long?
I know. I say I know, and at the same time, it's like, yeah, the times when you've thought about something, wanted something, and tried to figure out how, and then months down the road, like, why am I not doing this?
It's because we all fall into that trap. That's it. I mean, we just, we don't remember all the time that we can actually use this for anything we want in life. Sometimes we just forget. But it's nice to know that somebody who, with plenty of means, it's just as easy for them to fall in the trap as everybody else.
Yes. Well, that kind of winds up that chapter. This chapter was fantastic.
That was an amazing chapter. I loved all 8 stories. It was really, really good. Should probably take a moment just to get our announcements in because it's a nice place to break. First and foremost, if you're not yet a subscriber to the podcast, we really want you to become one. This is the kind of great content you get every time that we put out an episode. And it comes streaming to your smartphone just because you're a subscriber. So make sure you subscribe to the podcast. The links are found in most places where this recording is placed, both in the live stream and in recorded places. Just look in the description. If you don't find it in the description, just go to the homepage, loatoday.net, and you will find links for Android users and another link for Apple users. Just pick the right one for your device, and it'll walk you right through the process of subscribing. And once you're subscribed, make sure that you also take a time to put out there that you're listening each time. Every time that you listen to one of our episodes, put something on social media saying that you listened and maybe say something what you liked about it. But we need to get the word out so that more and more people can find out about your Daily Dose of Happy. Because, I mean, you found it this way, you found it through social media, that's how they're going to find it too. So please help get the word out. We really appreciate it. And then finally, I also wanted to mention, got an email today from somebody who, he lives in Los Angeles, and he had indicated that he's a big fan of the podcast. He loves listening to it. He listens to it on the way into work every day. He'd also downloaded the Blue Jeans app and had tried to connect to us during the show. And I realized from the time frame he gave us that he didn't realize when we were actually live streaming it. So I sent him details about when the times are when we live stream it. So if perhaps somebody else besides Sam has tried to connect to us and has not been able to do that, you want to pay attention to the times that we're actually doing the podcasts. And if you're not sure what the times are, if you have trouble calculating the time zone shift and so forth, just send an email to me. Use the contact form at loatoday.net or send me an email, walt@loatoday.net, or just contact me through one of the social media, and I'll do the calculation for you and let you know what it is in your time zone. That's what I did for Sam. But do want to thank Sam for listening. Thank you for being a regular listener. He was so enthusiastic too, Cindy. I mean, he was just really enthusiastic. And he was kind of disappointed he hadn't contacted us successfully yet, so we're going to get a call one of these days from Sam.
Oh, that's great. I look forward to that. I love getting calls in the show.
Oh, absolutely.
Very
Me too. Yeah, good
calls
stuff.
And questions and shout-outs on social media. It's all so great. Keep doing it.
And if you're listening,
cards and letters too.
keep them coming, absolutely. And if you're listening to the live stream on Facebook and you have a question, by all means, type the question in and we'll be able to answer it right now live during the podcast. We aren't seeing any questions right now. A lot of, oh my God, it's exactly what the wife wanted. That was cool. But beyond that, we're asking questions. So we'll just continue reading the next chapter in the book. But if you have a question and you're listening live, type it in and I'll be watching the comment stream and I'll grab it and pull it into the conversation. So
I have this idea that during those months or weeks of time when the couple was imagining this other penthouse that they thought they were going to get,
right,
and falling asleep every night, the people that lived in the penthouse they actually got were suddenly having a desire to put mirrors on one wall and put a fireplace in there.
Oh, that's too funny. That is funny.
The wife of that couple was like, I have no idea why, but I really want to put a mirror on this wall, right? Getting it all ready for the new owners.
By the way, Deidre posted, she says, I have a story, but I'm not sure if it's been told on the show before. I pre-wrote it earlier so that I would not be distracted and miss anything on the podcast. May I share? It's a bit long to paste into the chat. Sure, we'd love to have you share. I mean, if you want to come on to the podcast itself, feel free, or if you just want to put it in the chat, I mean, whatever way you want to convey it to us is great, but yeah, we'd love to hear the story. That'd be great.
Yep. That would be great. Well, this next chapter, I'm waiting for a groan as the title is failure. After all those great success stories. But we'll dive in and see how far we go.
I'm not worried about failure, to be honest. I mean, I'm curious to see how Neville's going to view it, but I learned early on in life.
I'm actually really glad because, and he says, this book would not be complete without some discussion of failure in the attempted use of the law of assumption.
It's important.
And because we do often hear people say it didn't work.
Right.
We hear lots of people say it is working.
Yep.
But we also have, especially people that are just beginning and they don't understand what's going wrong. So Neville says it's entirely possible that you either have had or will have a number of failures in this respect, many of them in really important matters. If, having read this book, having a thorough knowledge of the application and working of the law of assumption, you faithfully apply it in an effort to attain some intense desire and fail, what is the reason? If to the question, did you persist enough, you can answer yes, and still the attainment of your desire was not realized, what is the reason for failure? The answer to this is the most important factor in the successful use of the law of assumption. The time it takes your assumption to become fact, your desire to be fulfilled, is directly proportionate to the naturalness of your feeling of already being what you want to be, of already having what you desire. The fact that it does not feel natural to you to be what you imagine yourself to be is the secret of your failure. Regardless of your desire, regardless of how faithfully and intelligently you follow the law, if you do not feel natural about what you want to be, you will not be it. If it does not feel natural to you to get a better job, you will not get a better job. The whole principle is vividly expressed by the Bible phrase, you die in your sins. John 8:24. You do not transcend from your present level to the state desired. So once again, we need to reiterate what Neville's talking about when he talks about sin.
Right.
When Neville uses the term sin, he's going back to the actual original language that the definition of which is just to miss the mark. So if you imagine shooting a bow and arrow, or maybe throwing a dart at a dartboard, and you miss the bullseye, or you maybe miss the dartboard altogether, just miss the target, that's sin. And Forgiveness of sin would be to aim again and aim better this time and hit the target this time. So when he talks about dying in your sins, I think he's talking about staying in that place where you're missing the mark. Is that what it sounds like to you?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's Neville Dakota ring territory, but it fits the way that he tends to think about things, so I'd say yes.
And, we were talking about this morning, about assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled until it becomes natural.
Yes.
Right? And it's kind of funny because I didn't know this was coming up, but he says, how can this feeling of naturalness be achieved? And here's the thing, if that's the most important thing, then we need to figure out how we can achieve it.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. The secret lies in one word, imagination. For example, this is a very simple illustration. Assume you are securely chained to a large, heavy iron bench. You could not possibly run. In fact, you could not even walk. In these circumstances, it would not be natural for you to run. You could not even feel that it was natural for you to run. But you could easily imagine yourself running. In that instant, while your consciousness is filled with your imagined running, you've forgotten that you're bound. In imagination, your running was completely natural. The essential feeling of naturalness can be achieved by persistently filling your consciousness with imagination, imagining yourself being what you want to be or having what you desire. Progress can spring only from your imagination, from your desire to transcend your present level. What you truly and literally must feel is that with your imagination, all things are possible. You must realize that changes are not caused by caprice, but by a change of consciousness. You may fail to achieve or sustain the particular state of consciousness necessary to produce the effect you desire. But once you know that consciousness is the only reality and is the sole creator of your particular world, and have burnt this truth into your whole being, then you know that success or failure is entirely in your own hands. Whether or not you are disciplined enough to sustain the required state of consciousness in specific instances has no bearing on the truth of the law itself, that an assumption, if persisted in, will harden into fact. The certainty of the truth of this law must remain despite great disappointment and tragedy, even when you see the light of life go out and all the world go on as though it were still day. You must not believe that because your assumption failed to materialize, the truth that assumptions do materialize is a lie. If your assumptions are not fulfilled, it is because of some error or weakness in your consciousness. However, these errors and weaknesses can be overcome. Therefore, press on to the attainment of ever higher levels by feeling that you already are the person you want to be. And remember that the time it takes your assumption to become reality is proportionate to the naturalness of being it. I like that idea, right? I was thinking as we're reading this, we're talking about failure, that it's possible.
Yep.
And I think that most of the time it's because we give up. In other words, Neville is saying that once the feeling becomes natural, you're there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think so many times we don't get to the place where we give up before it feels natural. We stop persisting, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he says, and remember that the time it takes your assumption to become reality is proportionate to the naturalness of being it.
And I like that phrase. I like that phrase a lot. Being proportionate to the naturalness of being it. Naturalness of being it. I kind of interpret that to mean living it, being in it, not just creating the imagination, but the imagination becoming real in your experience. And I think if that is the goal, I've been doing I've told about some of the vignettes I've been doing lately, and in each case, I'm trying to do exactly that. That's exactly what I did too when we had that bad diagnosis for Louise. I mean, I was doing it fiercely. I was very fiercely getting into the feeling of the state of the wish fulfilled, and just living in that space. I mean, I was living in the space. Literally, for me, the vignette was Louise being like she used to be. Just lively and happy and full of energy and full of, everything that we want to do in life and so forth. Just that being in that place. And I didn't have to work hard at it because I was pretty passionate about wanting to get her to be healthy again. But boy, it did make a difference to actually be in that the way he says it, proportionate to the naturalness of being it. My proportion was pretty close to 100%. I was really feeling that.
What's interesting about that is that you'd already experienced that before?
Yes.
Like you've had that experience before of her being full of vim and vigor, right? And being healthy and you knowing what that felt like. So it would seem that it would be something that would be pretty easy to feel natural for you.
It would be, but what made the difference was the passion of it. Interestingly enough, the passion is what drove me. It's what gave me it gave me the easy access to the naturalness. That naturalness, I just kind of slipped into because the passion level was so high.
Yeah. Oh, I love this. Such a good point. So he ends with this from Emerson. Man surrounds himself with the true image of himself. Every spirit builds itself a house, and beyond its house a world, and beyond its world a heaven. Know then that the world exists for you. For you the phenomenon is perfect. Mm-hmm. What we are, that only can we see. All that Adam had, all that Caesar could, you have and can do. Adam called his house heaven and earth. Caesar called his house Rome. You perhaps call yours a cobbler's trade, 100 acres of land, or a scholar's garret. Yet line for line and point for point, your dominion is as great as theirs, though without a fine name. Build therefore your own world. As fast as you conform your life to the pure idea in your mind, that will unfold its great proportion. Emerson.
Yeah.
It's interesting that a few of the philosophers and poets that Neville quotes, you can really see that they had this idea that he teaches.
Oh, yeah.
They had it down. They understood it, right?
Really interesting, too. And I have to say, some of them, like Emerson, comes to mind. I read a fair amount of Emerson, and either I wasn't getting it or I was reading the wrong pieces because he reads these things and I say, why didn't I get this before? I don't even remember this at all. It's interesting. I'm not quite sure what's going on there.
Well, I think it's interesting that even I've read Neville for, 10 years at least, maybe longer, maybe 15, and I'll go back and read a book I've already read, and all kinds of new things will pop out to me. I guess it's when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Yeah, I guess so. Right. Exactly. Yeah. By the way, Deidre. Yeah, Deidre shared her story. I'll read what she wrote. She said, "Here's another amazing Nevilleizing story." I like that word. I cannot find the exact lecture on YouTube where he told the story, so I will have to rely on my memory. A couple were attendees of Neville Goddard's lectures, and they wanted/needed to apply his instructions toward an issue they were having. They bought a house which had acres and acres of land on which they wanted to build an apartment building. They had no money to do this, not even a couple $100 in the bank, but they still wanted to have their apartment building with each unit occupied. They did what Neville told them to do and assumed the feeling of the wish fulfilled and created a scene in their imaginations whereby they have the building and the tenants. The couple did this, seeing the building in their mind's eye, entering each unit of the building fully decorated. They were happy to have what they desired, but in actuality did absolutely nothing but replay the scene in their minds. And shortly thereafter, they had a visitor show up on their doorstep. He was a contractor or a developer who apologized, saying that he normally did not do things like this, going to people. He said people came to him. He told them what his business was and talked to them about possible developments to their land. And they told him exactly what they wanted to do with their land, but that they did not have the money. He told them not to worry, he would see what he could do. And he returned the next day and told them he could finance the project himself if, in years to come, they would repay him with interest after the project was completed and they had tenants occupying the building. They agreed and signed the papers for the project to begin, and within 2 weeks the builders broke ground and began the building project, and within months the couple had their apartment building just the way they imagined it, beautiful and fully rented, without putting one penny of their own money into the building of it. The story is much longer than this, but the bottom line is the law of assumption works just as Neville says it does when applied properly as he teaches. Very good. Thank you, Deidre.
Hey, that's fantastic.
That's a good story.
I love these stories where help appeared from without.
Yes.
You know, from some other source, some other person, and how often the person was like, I don't usually do this. It's like, they were moved to offer help.
Exactly.
It's pretty wonderful.
And I'm not sure what he was referring to, but Jeffrey at one point said, thank you, Cindy. I feel like others are expecting me to fail at my dreams. It takes its toll. And I know exactly what he means by that, because when you have a dream that others are buying into and are actually contradicting and saying, no, that can't happen, you're kind of like the boy who wants the puppy. You're being told you can't have the puppy. You're not going to get the puppy. Don't listen to what Neville said.
No, that's so true, right? It's like, and a lot of times, I think the grandmother, her intention was good.
Sure.
Right? Like, she knew that the parents were not going to go for a puppy. Apparently, I think she said, we've talked about this already, right? It's like, we've talked about this.
Absolutely.
And so she's trying to save the boy from disappointment.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In the same way that in Neville's own family, when the son was picturing their family name on the side of the building, and he didn't tell anybody but one person, his mother, and his mother tried to discourage him because she didn't want him to be disappointed. Right. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm a mother. It's like, have I been doing this? I hope not. But we do. We try to protect those that we care about. And sometimes, it's easy to be a dream crusher in the process. So,
yep.
Oh no, you're dreaming too big. We don't want you to be disappointed. So you're right. I just be persistent and stay with it and hold the vision. Holding the vision is probably the most important skill we can learn in conscious creation.
I think so.
When everyone around us is telling us it can't happen, when everything our eyes see tells us it's not happening, to be able to hold the vision still.
Yes.
That's the magic maker.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely it is. I agree.
And this chapter, the next chapter, is titled Faith. And, I think that's what we're talking about here is faith.
Well, before we get into faith, I have two more comments to share. First, Jeffrey says, "Yeah, my mother is my biggest critic," so he knows exactly what you're talking about there.
I'm
Deidre,
sorry.
It's not your fault. Deidre had an interesting comment and a question, or she didn't ask us a question. She made a statement, but I thought it was worth discussing. I wanted to see what your take would be on it. She says, okay. Neville also says that doubt is sin and that doubting God is sin. Says that, according to her, Neville says that doubt is sin and doubting God is sin. What do you think of that?
Okay. This is a pretty easy one, I think, for when we're talking about Neville. Mm-hmm. Because God, Neville, equates to our imagination. Mm-hmm. Right? And when we start doubting, he says sin is missing the mark.
Right.
Right? So if our faith is an arrow that hits the bullseye, then our doubt causes that arrow to miss the target. So it's sin. Doubt is sin because doubt is pulling our arrow away from the target. Doubt is causing our faith to go out of focus. Doubt is causing us to miss the mark. And so when we're doubting, he says God, we're doubting our imagination, right? If our imagination and our consciousness are all that is, and our imagination is the only tool that is going to create what we want, when we start doubting, we're doubting our imagination.
That's true.
Because it is the only thing. So we can't be doubting anything else, right? We're just doubting God. We're doubting the process. We're not trusting the process here.
Pretty much, yeah, that's it. So very good.
That's it in a nutshell.
So thanks for bringing that up, Deidre. That was good. I wanted to make sure we actually touched on that one because that's part of the Neville decoder ring stuff. You have to know what the translations mean.
Right. So are we ready to dive into faith How are we on time?
We might have a chance to get through it. Sometimes we fly through them, sometimes we crawl through them. Let's see which one it is.
Let's see what happens. A miracle is the name given by those who have no faith to the works of faith. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Hebrews 11:1. The very reason for the law of assumption is contained in this quotation. If there were not a deep-seated awareness that that which you hope for had substance and was possible of attainment, it would be impossible to assume the consciousness of being or having it. It is the fact that creation is finished and everything exists that stirs you to hope. And hope, in turn, implies expectation. And without expectation of success, it would be impossible to use consciously the law of assumption. Evidence is a sign of actuality. Thus, this quotation means that faith is the awareness of the reality of that which you assume. And in brackets, so you might not have this in the paperback copy, it says, a conviction of the reality of things which you do not see. The mental perception of the reality of the invisible. And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about holding the vision.
Mm-hmm.
It's an inner vision. It's an imagination vision. But there's a conviction that it is real.
Right.
Even when your physical eyes don't see it, right? Consequently, it's obvious that a lack of faith means disbelief in the existence of that which you desire. So, Deirdre, this is what you're talking about when we talk about doubt, right? It's a lack of faith. Inasmuch as that which you experience is the faithful reproduction of your state of consciousness, lack of faith will mean perpetual failure in any conscious use of the law of assumption. In all the ages of history, faith has played a major role. It permeates all the great religions of the world. It is woven through all mythology, and yet today it's almost universally misunderstood. Contrary to popular opinion, the efficacy of faith is not due to the work of any outside agency. It's from first to last an activity of your own consciousness. The Bible is full of many statements about faith, of true meaning of which few are aware. Here are some typical examples. Unto us was the gospel preached as well as unto them, but the word preached did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in them that heard it. In this quotation, the us and the them make clear that all of us hear the gospel. Gospel means good news. Very obviously, good news for you would be that you had attained your desire. This is always being preached to you by your infinite self. To hear that which you desire does not exist, and you need only to accept it in consciousness, is good news. Not mixing with faith means to deny the reality of that which you desire. Hence, there's no profit, attainment possible. This reminds me of Abraham telling us that our higher being, our inner being, is always in alignment with our highest good.
Mm-hmm.
And that when we're in alignment, we know it because of how we feel. When we're out of alignment, we also know it because of how we feel.
Right.
So he's saying this idea, this good news that you can have what you desire, it's always being, he says with air quotes, preached to you
Yes.
by your infinite self. And so that tells me we always know it because of how we feel.
Mm-hmm. It's a good point. And the thing that also occurred to me is that he describes this thing that we're imagining as reality. He calls it reality. He says, to be faithless is to disbelieve in the reality of that which you assume, which kind of turns concepts on their heads because we usually tend to differentiate between what we're imagining and reality. But he's saying, no, what we're imagining is the reality, and that's the way we should be thinking about it, which is true in one sense. I mean, you really do have to do that. It just makes it a little bit tricky when you're trying to describe what reality you're talking about.
Exactly.
But it's a good point.
So the rest of this chapter really needs the decoder ring. So he quotes Matthew and says, "O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you?" He says the meaning of faithless has been made clear. Perverse means turned the wrong way. In other words, the consciousness of not being what you want to be. To be faithless, that is, to disbelieve in the reality of that which you assume, is to be perverse. So once again, missing the mark.
Yes.
Turned in the wrong way.
And a completely different use of the word perverse from what we normally have. I like this use of it. I think it's a good one.
Me too. He says, how long shall I be with you means that the fulfillment of your desire is predicated upon your change to the right state of consciousness. It's just as though that which you desire is telling you that it will not be yours until you turn from being faithless and perverse to righteousness. And remember, we've talked about what he means by when he says righteousness.
Yeah.
It's the rightness of your vision that you're holding.
Mm-hmm.
Right? As already stated, righteousness is the consciousness of already being what you want to be. Then he quotes again from Hebrews, by faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. Egypt, here's the Neville decoder ring in action. Egypt means darkness, belief in many gods or causes. The king, in quotes, the king symbolizes the power of outside conditions or circumstances. He is your concept of yourself as already being what you want to be. Enduring as seeing him who is invisible means persisting in the assumption that your desire is already fulfilled. Thus, this quotation means that by persisting in the assumption that you already are the person you want to be, you rise above all doubt, fear, and belief in the power of outside conditions or circumstances, and your world inevitably conforms to your assumption. The dictionary definitions of faith: the assent of the mind or understanding to the truth, unwavering adherence to principle, are so pertinent that they might as well have been written with the law of assumption in mind. Faith does not question. Faith knows.
As usual with Neville, my brain starts to spin when the Neville decoder ring kicks into gear.
Well, if we keep in mind this very last bit, that faith does not question, faith knows.
Mm-hmm.
We can go back to what we talked about this morning, or maybe yesterday morning, about hope. When you catch yourself saying, I hope, I'm hoping this happens, that's a lot different than I know this is going to happen. And so that's sort of a meter. It's like the faith meter telling us where our faith is. And there's no judgment there. It's not a pass or fail kind of test. It's just a litmus test that says, when I'm still wishing and hoping, then I don't know for sure yet.
Mm-hmm.
Like, seriously. And we use this kind of faith all the time. When I jump on the podcast in the morning, if I get here first, I don't say to myself, well, I hope we're having a podcast today. I hope Walt shows up. Like, I know Walt's going to show up. And I hope that when he gets here first, he knows I'm going to show up. Right? There's a knowing.
Right.
Why? Well, because I have faith he's going to be here. Right?
Exactly.
So when I throw a letter in the mailbox, I don't hope it's going to get where I'm sending it to. I know it's going to get there because I have pretty good faith in the postal service. I mean, I've been using it my whole life and really haven't had too many things lost in the mail. Right? So faith, when you have faith, you know. And so it's important that we get to that point where we have a knowing that it's going to come to pass. That's Absolutely. The important thing, I think, to remember. I
think you're right, too. And I would like to summarize by saying, I know that I'm looking forward to doing this again with you next week. Because unfortunately, we're out of time for today. But I am absolutely 100% certain we're going to do this again next week. And I'm hoping very much.
You're going to do it next week, but I'm going to be gone until next year.
Did I say next week? I meant in 2 weeks. Mental lapse.
But I do have faith that we will do this again.
I believe he called that an error. Isn't that what he called that? That was an error. Oh, my goodness. But, no, seriously, I hope you have a wonderful Christmas, and I look forward to talking to you after the new year.
Thank you. I'll be back.
And we'll be inviting everybody else to come back as well next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.